Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Tammy Weinseck. I'm an instructor in the digital communication program here. And we've been putting together a lecture series called Ideas and Inspiration in Iowa, Leaders Speak at William Penn University. And I know everyone says this when they introduce someone when they're speaking, but we are truly pleased to have our leader speak here at William Penn tonight. His name is David Price, and for those of you who have been in this TV market watching Des Moines TV for many years, you would recognize Dave readily. He's the weekend anchor at WHO-TV, the NBC affiliate in Des Moines, and he's also known as WHO-TV's political director. And he can fill you in on what all that title means, but to me it means that he has been a political reporter in Iowa for, Dave, you're going to have to fill in the blank, but easily at least 15 years? Almost? Okay. So what that means is, Dave, this is really important to us. Sure, we're setting up Dave, but this is what it means to us. Dave has a lot of institutional knowledge as a reporter about Iowa politics and really Iowa in general. And that's really valuable for us as voters and people who watch television news or pay attention to news, because when a reporter knows the people who have the seats of the table of power, the issues at that table, the background of those issues, they can inform us, the electorate, of what they in an informed way think that we need to know so we can make decisions for our lives. And Dave is the type of reporter who has stuck around this market, who knows the players, and can give us true analysis on important things like politics in Iowa. So he's written a book about the Iowa caucuses and will be speaking about our role in those important Iowa caucuses and how we can plug in and why it's so important that we do. So Dave, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to ask you to come forward and help illuminate us about all the important things that you know, and I do say that respectfully. Come on up.
I've known Tammy for a while, although when during that introduction, you just called me David. And only my mom does that. So I was almost off in a daze there until you said that, and all of a sudden I stood up and paid attention. So thank you. Thanks, everybody. Glad to be here tonight. I thought we'd do this a little, perhaps a little informally, even though we're on a college campus. I don't really like to play college professor up here. No offense to anyone. I love doing TV for a living, but as you know, it's sort of a one-way medium. We kind of talk into a screen and hope that you're paying attention and hope you care what we're talking about at home. And we try not to remember the fact that you're probably sitting there in your underwear watching the news, or worse. So I sort of relish these opportunities where we can kind of have a little bit more back and forth. So I hope that we can kind of do that. So I think they're going to have microphones kind of work the room in that. So feel free to just kind of throw your hand up whenever if you want me to kind of get into a topic a little bit more than we're doing, or if you have a question that pops up. I thought I'd start about what's going on right now, as we're all trying to figure out what exactly is going on right now. You know, we have a good probably, I can't even keep track how many people we have running anymore. Not quite as many as we had before, but we have a good 15 or so that are active. Let's do the easy side first. So let's start with the Democrats, because they're a lot more manageable and easier to keep track of. And since one of them was just in this very room a couple of months ago, a month or so ago, this race obviously is a lot different than what we saw the last time we had a really competitive one here back in 2008, where you had a big field there, and we had Barack Obama kind of came out of nowhere for a while. Hillary Clinton was the established front runner, and we had John Edwards, who had his own track record there. So this time we're basically down to three, right? Hillary Clinton still comes in as the massive front runner here. Everybody knows her. They've been part of politics, she and her husband, for 30, 40 years, whatever it is. And then you have this Bernie Sanders phenomenon that just sort of came up out of nowhere. And as I was driving down here, I was trying to think of the first time that I interviewed Bernie Sanders. And I remember it was I do this Sunday morning show at 9:30 at the TV station. And I remember I heard from one of Bernie Sanders' staffers sometime in the spring. This is when he was still thinking about running for president. And he said, hey, would you want to do a satellite interview with Senator Sanders? And I had heard of him, but frankly, I didn't know very much about him. I just knew he's one of those, I don't mean odd I need a better word, probably unique. I don't mean odd like you're weird. It's just different in the sense that he's an independent. He's not a Democrat or a Republican, which is so different in Congress. And I thought, well, yeah, sure. It seemed like this was going to be kind of a boring race, and Hillary Clinton was going to run away with it, whatever. So I thought, yeah, sure, we'll do it. So we interview him. And at the time, no big deal. Nothing big came out of that. And it's been fascinating to watch this kind of momentum build here, because it feels to me like you have a little bit on the Democratic side like we do on the Republican side, and a much bigger thing in the sense that you have this outsider. So Bernie Sanders feels like he's kind of the outsider candidate, right? Even though he's been in public service for decades now. So you have the Hillary Clinton establishment kind of person versus Bernie Sanders, this outsider. And what's interesting to me about Sanders is that when he comes to a room like this, and when he did come here, the room was so young. And it reminds me of Ron Paul when he ran in 2008. So here you have Bernie Sanders, who I think just turned 74, if I remember right. And most of the people in the audience are under 30, right? Like you guys, I'm assuming. Which is sort of a fascinating following. It just seems, there's something about this older guy who found a way to connect with the younger crowd. Like I said, it reminded me a lot of what Ron Paul did on the Republican side back in 2008. For Sanders, and they have the feel the burn, so they have all their cool little sayings and stuff, but it's been fascinating about how he's brought new people into the mix. And there is it feels like an excitement level difference maybe between the Clinton side and the Sanders side, and I'm not diminishing the power that Clinton has because of her organization and her reputation and all those things, her fundraising prowess. I mean, she's clearly a force and by far the front runner in all this. There does seem to be, at least up to this point, kind of excitement level difference maybe between them. Sanders, when he walks in, the place goes kind of nuts, and it's just a different kind of energy. Now, whether he can build on that to beat Clinton seems like a tall order. Not saying impossible, but it just seems like that's going to be pretty tough to do, just because, she knows how things work. She knows how to organize, and their campaign organization is amazing. Frankly, she wasn't the easiest person to cover in 2008, and I think the feeling that a lot of us got was that there was a level of almost arrogance in her campaign, that they knew they were going to win. We never got any time with her to do interviews, anything like that, until the very end, and then all of a sudden they were making her available when it was clear the numbers were changing back at the end of 2007. This time around, by no means are they offering us up to the media all the time, but she is more accessible than she had been before. If you remember early on in this campaign, she was getting knocked around for that, but she is more accessible than she was before, and without a doubt, she's coming to this state far more often. She's basically coming to Iowa about once a week now, which she didn't do that last time until almost the very end. I think Friday she'll be in Fort Dodge, probably the closest to here. But clearly they're making a bigger effort in Iowa than they have in the past. Hadn't mentioned Martin O'Malley yet, the former governor of Maryland. That is a guy who, do you know that Johnny Cash song, I've Been Everywhere? I won't sing it, but you guys know the song. If I had any talent, I would sing it. But it's all about traveling all over the place. Martin O'Malley's done that. He's been everywhere, but he can't seem to translate that into anything. He even pulls out his guitar, sings. He's clearly musically talented, but he's worked his butt off in the state, but has not found a way to really connect. And I'm very curious now that we're down to the 2-month point to the caucuses, kind of what his strategy is here. He's not raising much money. He's not really showing up much in the polls. So if you're way behind in the polls, and you have Hillary Clinton up here, and you have Bernie Sanders about right here, and you're here, or probably about right here, do you go after the number 2 person, maybe try to beat up Sanders and knock him down so that you're the alternative, or do you go after Clinton and hope that you can find some way to knock her down and make her look beatable? To me, I would assume he'd start focusing on Sanders maybe, so that he can kind of be, if he maybe portrays Sanders as somebody who's unelectable, has kind of these big picture ideas, but it's not really doable. Whereas Sanders will tell you that he's trying to build a revolution here to completely upend the system and do things a lot differently. And if O'Malley can make the argument that, hey, that sounds good, but it's never going to happen kind of thing, and if you don't like Clinton and all the drama that goes with the Clintons, then go for me. He hasn't really laid it out that way, and I'm curious if he'll have to do that, because he's really starting to run out of time here, and unfortunately, there's going to come a point where he's not going to be relevant in the race, and frankly, people aren't going to cover him anymore, which is sort of an unfair thing to say, but when push comes to shove there, that final month of the campaign, there are only so many people to go around media-wise to cover you, and if you got Clinton in town and Sanders in town, they're going to take a lot of attention if it looks like this third guy has no chance. So I think the pressure is really on him in the next month or so to find something to make an oomph. I mean, he's done a lot of the legwork here, but maybe got kind of a slow start starting out here, but I mean, the odds are sort of against him. Okay, let's look at the Republican side. I was going to list every person running for president, but we'd be here till about 10 probably. So let's first maybe talk about the force that's going on right now with this outsider movement, which has been so fascinating and so unpredictable. I mean, did anybody seriously think Donald Trump would still be tops in the polls by this point? But what's so interesting to me is that not only has Trump survived, remember everybody kept calling it the summer of Trump, and then he was going to collapse when the calendar turned? Well, the calendar keeps turning, so we're now in December, and he still keeps hanging around. And he gets beat up for things he says, he gets beat up for claims he makes that maybe don't quite check out factually, but it doesn't matter. He just keeps hanging in there. I mean, he's clearly a force, and he's tapped into, we just had my wife's family up from Florida for Thanksgiving, and they were asking me, how is Trump still doing it? Now, they're not a couple who's ever going to support him, but I think people are kind of missing the point with Trump in that he's tapped into people who are just ticked off, and people who don't trust politicians, they don't trust the media. So if other politicians are ripping on Trump, people who like Trump think, who cares? They're just politicians. Somebody's bought and paid for them. The media, we're all evil. We all have a bias. Trump likes to make fun of the media. His followers think the media, you can't trust them either. So if you can't trust the politicians, you can't trust the media, then you trust Donald Trump, right? I mean, he's a fascinating entity, and I think people kind of discount what he's trying to do. I mean, he clearly knows what he's doing. He clearly knows what he's saying. I mean, he has a purpose to everything. He's very thoughtful. We did it at my station 2 weeks ago. We did an hour-long live special with Trump. It was supposed to start at 4 o'clock. Trump showed up at 4:09, which made my bosses sweat and made me sweat because I was sitting on stage in a chair next to an empty chair waiting for Trump to finally show up, and I could finally see the Secret Service down the hall kind of moving around, so we brought him out. And, I mean, he clearly knows what he's doing. He didn't say anything really controversial, fired people up, stood there, took my questions, took the audience's questions. Every time we went to a commercial break, so the people at home didn't see this, but every time we went to a commercial break, he started talking, oh, hey, William Penn, you like the school? Like, he's looking at your shirts, your hats. Hey, nice your shirt there. Hey, nice. I mean, he made conversation with everybody. People were throwing books on stage, so he'd sign them real quick and throw them back. He was posing for pictures. I mean, he is a true showman, and he's never off. Like, he worked it the entire time. And I'm not saying he's going to win, but I'm not saying he's not going to win by this point. I mean, we're 2 months out, and he's not really eroding yet. And if he's tapped into people who are just so fed up with everything, fed up with Democrats, fed up with Republicans, everybody, all elected officials, let's kick them all out and start over, then he may have a winning message. And this might be the election that people are just so ticked off that everybody out, let's try something new. You know, sort of like, in a way, Sanders does it. Obviously, he does it in a totally different way on the Democratic side. But all right, so we have this whole Trump thing. So I'm thinking, all right, that makes a little bit of sense. Except for then you have Ben Carson also. who Ben Carson does it, same way, not a politician. He does it maybe in a lot nicer way than Donald Trump does it. He's far less kind of in your face. And sometimes when he talks, it looks like he just woke up. He's very like low energy and like this all the time. But I mean, he has a way that he connects with people. People really, really, really like the guy. And if you look at the polls, he's one of the most liked Republicans out of all of them in the race in our state. So he doesn't do it by yelling. He doesn't jump up and down. He doesn't do all those kind of things. And, he's definitely not an in-your-face kind of guy, but people really like him and they get to meet him. To me, it would be surprising if we can have both of these outsiders kind of stay as top-tier contenders. It would seem that one of them is going to fall, but hasn't. It seems like also that everything we've thought about this race has been completely wrong. So maybe there is room for both of them. I'd probably also put Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio maybe in that upper tier. It feels like those four are probably the most likely to do well at this point. And I brought something along to show, because people were asking about Cruz and his organization early on. He just finished up this, he was here for 3 days, okay? Donald Trump, when he comes down, pretty much does one event. Tons of people show up, a lot of cameras, the media show up. He does his thing, and he works the crowd afterwards, and then he leaves. Doesn't usually stay here. Clinton will occasionally, she may do usually one, maybe does two while she's here. They kind of spread it out a little bit. So I printed this out because I was looking at what Cruz just did. So Cruz got here Saturday, okay? He started at 11 o'clock in the morning in Greenfield. So all in one day, he goes Greenfield, Corning, Creston, Lenox, Mount Ayr, Lamoni, and then at 10 o'clock at night, he went to the Casey's Pizza place and had a rally there. So however many that is in one day. And then the next day, he goes to Des Moines, Newton, Tama, Van Horn. Then yesterday was Coralville, Clinton, and Bettendorf. I don't even know how many that is, 14, 15, 16 places. I mean, the guy is really working it, which is why he's probably one of the favorites to win the caucuses. He has found a way to harness some of the anger that the Trump folks feel, those kind of folks who are just so ticked off with the way things go. He talks and believes in what the social conservatives want to hear and believe, so he has a connection with them. He's a constitutional guy, so he quotes the Constitution a lot. So he's found a way to kind of harness all that into one force, which to me makes him, I think, one of the top contenders to finish in the top three, unless something really goes wrong for him. And especially if Trump finally loses his magic with people and just goes too far or whatever happens there, or the people who are attracted to Trump, who a lot of times are not people who turn out to caucus, maybe they'd get bored with this, and come February they'll find something else to do on caucus night and they won't show up. So that would really put Cruz in a position. Would really put Cruz in a position to do well. Marco Rubio to me is also a guy who it feels like could have kind of one of those big moments in our state. He hasn't worked the ground nearly as hard as Cruz has, and not even as hard as Carson has either, probably. But if you look at this election where whatever you think an establishment or a traditional Republican is, if you're looking at Chris Christie, John Kasich, Rubio, Jeb Bush, that kind of crowd, if you will, Jeb Bush has just not found, I think the national media set this up as it was going to be Hillary Clinton versus Jeb Bush, right? Nothing else was going to matter until they started campaigning, and then everything else mattered. Which is why the national media sometimes drive me crazy, but because they all think they know what Iowa's going to be, right? They spend, 10 days a year here or something, and they've got everybody figured out. They know who you like, they know who you like, they know what you're going to think. Except for then the campaigning starts and they find out, oh, wow, this is not what we thought. I mean, they didn't predict Barack Obama was going to win, right? No way a black guy can win Iowa. No way. Can't happen. Except it did twice. They did not think that could happen. All right, so this time it's going to be Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, right? Jeb Bush has not found a following anywhere. Spent a ton of money. His super PAC spent a ton of money. And whether it's Bush fatigue, whether people think, 2 Bushes are enough to be president, whatever it is, it just hasn't worked. So to me, as we stand here now, it would seem that if he's not going to take off here, and Chris Christie and John Kasich, they haven't really worked it nearly as hard here, so it's hard to see them really taking off here. that kind of leaves that whole lane for Rubio. So those four people seem like those could be the ones best positioned. Okay, Tammy was nice enough to plug the book. Here's why I think 2012 matters and why everything I just said could be completely wrong. Because if you think back to 2012, virtually every Republican candidate, and the Democrats were nice and easy to figure out because Obama's running for re-election, so they were easy to figure out. But on the Republican side, virtually everybody who ran was a front runner at some point, right? Remember Herman Cain? He was a front runner for a while, until about every other woman in America alleged that he either hit on him or had an affair with him or whatever it was. I mean, there were 7, 8 women, whatever it was, which pretty much sunk his chances there. And if you remember last time around, Donald Trump was a front runner for a while, and he wasn't even running. Rick Perry was, Michelle Bachmann. I mean, Romney, of course, ended up getting the nomination, but almost everybody was a front runner. And in Iowa, we're watching all this happen. They go up, they go down, whatever. Once they went up and came down, they didn't come back, right? They were done. Then you have somebody like Rick Santorum, who I just interviewed today, actually. Rick Santorum did everything he was supposed to, including working his butt off. So for most of the campaign, he could never fill a room like this. He could probably fill you three. And I went to some of those rallies where there were literally a couple people in the room, and you're thinking, dang, I feel bad for this guy. Why didn't he just hang it up? That's got to be very humbling to, your campaign sets up an event, you go in there and the music plays and there's nobody in there. But Santorum kept plugging along, and he felt like as long as he could get out and meet as many people as he could, then sooner or later you were going to go to all those shiny objects that the national media were talking about, but you're going to decide, I don't really like him. And Santorum, I like most of what he has to say. So he kept plugging along. Even 2 weeks before the caucuses, it didn't look like he had a chance. And then if you remember, caucus night was kind of a mess. And at 1:30 or so in the morning, the state party chair at the time, Matt Strawn, under a lot of pressure, gets up and says, Mitt Romney's the winner of the caucuses, right? And we get into this in the book, but he was warned not to do this, but he did it anyway, and he was feeling a lot of pressure from the national media to do it, so he gets up there and, in the end, kind of makes I don't want to say that word, kind of makes a butt of himself. But, he kind of hung himself in front of everybody, which was the unfortunate part. So it took a couple weeks to straighten it all out, but in the end, Santorum was the actual winner once they had started tallying up everything, So Santorum never really got his 15 minutes of fame because Romney comes out of here as the winner, and then Santorum really was the runner-up for the Republicans, but kind of didn't get a lot of praise for that. So Santorum, if you look at people like Santorum, you look at people like Mike Huckabee, who won the caucuses back in 2008, those people, they don't want to give up. They saw what happened in 2008, and they're thinking, why should I give up? Sure, the polls have me way down here. Maybe I'm at 2%, 1%, 3%, whatever, and Trump's maybe at 30. But they think that you're going to get tired of these front runners. They're going to make some kind of big mistake. Maybe they're going to run out of money like Scott Walker, Wisconsin's governor, did, who gave one good speech here and built this enormous, expensive campaign. And then all of a sudden, showed that the process of running for president is pretty hard. And he had some troubles answering certain questions and just kind of collapsed. They quit raising money. He got shown the door, which is what happens. Rick Perry ran a second time, same deal. He just couldn't find the money, couldn't find the support, and then he becomes an afterthought. Bobby Jindal, same way. But they all kept plugging along thinking they can do it. So you have people like Santorum, and Santorum is smart. He's so accessible. So I'll give you three examples. The day Scott Walker dropped out of the race, Santorum was coming to my station for an interview. So he comes in. We were supposed to sit down and do a taped interview. So he comes in, and I said, hey, Walker just dropped out. How about coming in? We'll do a live interview in the 4 o'clock news. I had to actually go into the bathroom where he was to tell him, hey, I need you on the air in about 2 minutes, which was awkward. So he says, yeah, sure. Comes out there, boom, perfect. Comes out there, talks a little bit about Walker's mistakes, and he says, you know what, I'm not going to make that mistake because we run lean and mean here. As long as we have enough money to fill up the gas tank, I'm going to travel all over the place, Scott Walker got ahead of himself, spent way too much money, and paid the price. So all right, that's good. I mentioned my station had an hour-long forum with Trump, right? Well, I set it up where we did Ben Carson one day, Trump was the third day. The second day, I had Bobby Jindal scheduled. So the night before, during the 5 o'clock news, literally as I'm on the air, I get an alert that Bobby Jindal just dropped out of the race. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, holy crap, because tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we're supposed to do an hour-long special live with Bobby Jindal, which was a problem. So that night, I'm calling around to different campaigns trying to figure out what we can do. Rick Santorum's campaign, they moved stuff around. We sent our satellite truck up there. We did an hour live with them. So he got an hour live, 4 o'clock news, both for people watching on TV, plus it was streamed on our website and sent to all of my company stations across the country, which is like 40 stations. So he does a lot of smart things. Today I did a story on renewable energy. There's an ad out against Ted Cruz. Rick Santorum's been a big supporter of renewable fuels. Called his campaign. So literally right after Rick Santorum just finished up in Washington, D.C. shooting some campaign commercials, he was on his way to meet his wife at home where they were going to have kind of an early dinner with their kids. So as he drove, set up his iPhone on his dashboard, and I interviewed him through his iPhone for our 5 o'clock news tonight. And I don't want to make this sound like a Rick Santorum commercial, but there are certain things about the way he runs that are smart. So he's accessible. Now, granted, he's way down in the polls, so you can argue he has to be accessible. But there's a certain amount of work that he and some other previously successful candidates have done that it seems like pays off. To me, it seems like it's going to be a tough sled for him, tough climb this time. People have already got a taste of him back in 2012 and didn't want him. Not to be mean, but they wanted somebody else. And if this time is a time where you want some fresh blood in there, it's going to be tough for him to make that sell. But his point, Mike Huckabee's point, is that, hey, we're going to keep fighting out there, keep talking to people. Sooner or later, you're going to get tired of the other ones, and we're going to be there for you. All right, let's do some questions. What's on your mind? How many people in here have caucused, first of all? How many plan to caucus? First row didn't raise your hand, I'd like to point out. You're going to destroy my Bernie Sanders theory here that he's going to try to get young people to turn out. Do you have any interest in it or not? Or are you not from Iowa? Okay, that could be a good excuse. Okay. But you're from Iowa, you're just not into it? Well, I just put you on the spot now, so now you have to think about it. All right, what do you want to talk about? Sure.
I'm somewhat of a political junkie, and I've watched you for a number of years and really appreciate your interviews and information that you bring to Iowa. I think it's very important. Before I ask my question, I also want to say that when I watch you, one of my favorite things is when you get tickled and your eyes twinkle and you get a little grin on your face.
All right.
But
which happens now when I'm embarrassed.
But my question is, what is the responsibility of the journalist to confront a person during an interview when clearly they are misstating facts?
I think there is one. I mean, obviously that is the responsibility. Having said that, I mean, we miss a lot, especially during live interviews. And it's not a good excuse, but there's just a lot going on at the same time. What I hate, commercials obviously pay the bills. It's hard when we're doing my show, and especially when we do it live. You got to get to the commercial break, and you say something that I know needs something followed up upon, and it's so hard to pivot and to be able to get it all, especially when you have a producer in your earpiece saying, go to commercial, go to commercial, go to commercial. But clearly I think that's one of our biggest responsibilities. There was an exchange Sunday morning on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd and Trump. And you could tell that Chuck was getting super frustrated with what Trump was saying. And, Trump keeps saying that he saw videos of thousands of people after 9/11 celebrating, when the towers got attacked. And there's hasn't been any visible proof that thousands of people did that. We had talked about this right after it happened, but it depends if you're playing semantics here, but there were newspaper articles written at the time that there were police investigations into reports of that. And I think Washington Post did something on that and New York Times did something on that. Never in anything that I could ever find did it say thousands of people were celebrating in New Jersey, as Trump keeps alleging. And I follow him on Twitter, and he keeps citing these old newspaper articles that point to things about people getting investigated for celebrating, but it never says thousands. And that's what I was hoping Chuck was going to try to hammer him on a little bit, because just because there were reports of somebody, you're one person, so does that make you thousands? It does seem like he maybe takes a little bit of liberty with things. But I think, and you could tell, in my opinion, Chuck was starting to get a little animated, where he's saying, don't you owe it to people to tell the truth, And obviously people have different views of what the truth is. But I think we have to be the fact checkers, because otherwise these people can come in town and just spew all kinds of stuff. And if you think, oh, wow, I never heard that, I guess it's true, then, you may have a completely wrong opinion of this person. You may get completely misled. So I do think that's our big responsibility. It is, it's hard, and it's very time consuming, and it's hard. This is not a good excuse again, but it's even more difficult when you have so many candidates. Like, selfishly, I wish we had a bunch of them drop out, because I feel like the media would do a lot better job. If I'm comparing a story like Tonight at 10, if I'm doing a story on whatever, college tuition or something, and I can compare the three Democrats, it's still hard to probably get that in a 1.5, 2-minute story, but it's doable. But when it's for the Republicans, what the heck do you do with that? So you have 15 people or so. It's just not, the large field is not made for that. And I think because of that, then some of the vetting doesn't happen properly, because we just kind of get overwhelmed with, holy cow, who's in town today? And there's always somebody in town. Jeb Bush is in Newton right now. There's always somebody in town. Huckabee's in town today. I think it's only 2 today, but still, there's, no matter where, on almost any given day, there's a candidate somewhere. It's just, you're constantly chasing. And unfortunately, I think we miss a lot of the good reporting, where you dig into, if they're changing their positions on stuff, what their positions even are their claims true, that kind of thing.
How do you prepare to talk to a presidential candidate? What are the steps? How do you, find out what you're going to ask them and what you are going to ask them, and when you are going to ask them?
Sometimes I think it depends on the day. One of the things that I struggle with sometimes is that there's something in the news, whatever it is. Like, let's say there's another ISIS attack or whatever it is. You feel an obligation to ask them about whatever is right out there, but I also feel like everybody's going to do that. And so if I have some one-on-one time, I kind of want to get into some different subjects. So that those forums I was telling you about that my station did with Carson, ended up being Santorum and Trump. We tried something a lot different than we had ever done. So we had them do a full hour, and it was only on one topic. Whereas on my Sunday morning show, we usually bounce around and stuff. But I wanted to see if we could really kind of dig in. So we did Ben Carson on education. So I thought it gave people an insight into kind of who he is. So he's done some nonprofit work. He grew up really poor in Detroit. His mom was one of like 20 kids or something. And growing up, they found out his dad had a second family. So obviously mom kicked him out. And so he was raised just by his mom, and she could barely read herself, but yet reading was really important to her, And so I kind of wanted to get into that foundation a little bit to let him what do you think the role of education is, and what's the government's role in it? What's an individual's role in it? What's your teacher's role or your family's role? All that kind of stuff. So I felt like doing an hour on that kind of gave us time to breathe. We had to prepare for that in a lot different ways than we normally would, because we had to dig into education more than we normally would, frankly. With Santorum, we had already decided it was going to be about health. And I had told them I did not want to do an hour-long debate on Obamacare, because that has been talked to death. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important, but I don't think people can handle it for another hour. So we did a little bit of that, and then we kind of, Santorum has a daughter that has a very rare disease, and so it's obviously a very personal thing for him. So I wanted to give him time to kind of talk about that and to talk about how healthcare played into that. Did they see stuff in that makes them think the system works or doesn't work, whatever. And then with Trump, we had picked jobs because we were trying to make everything focused on the middle class. That was kind of our thing. And jobs and economy kind of worked in there, and obviously that's his background. So he had no problem, obviously he wanted to talk about that. And then we solicited a lot of questions. So some of it just depends what's going on that day. Like the day we had Santorum at the station, I hadn't planned on talking to him about Scott Walker, but right before the interview, Walker dropped out, so we sort of had to. And it seemed like it was kind of a good lesson to talk about. So I think it always depends. But frankly, I always use like audiences like this as a test case, because I really like to know. I think you can get a feel for what people are asking about. I think that helps to know what people are thinking about, as opposed to listening to the national media tell us what we're thinking about.
Hi there.
Hey.
A lot of times people, whether it's online or just to each other, especially young people, complain about stuff that the media might or might not be talking about, instead sensationalizing, say, statements and not real stances about actual candidates, but rather what they did behind the microphone, or say throwing a football at a kid in the head, instead of big things like that. As a member of the media, what's your take on that and prioritizing political news about candidates?
I think that this is where I think social media have become such a big part of the coverage. So that he's talking about when Marco Rubio was in town, he threw a football to this little boy, and the kid got knocked over or whatever. And for whatever reason, that became a thing. It's not like Rubio intentionally drilled this little kid, it just happened. But remember how that blew up? It was kind of ridiculous. Or just like anytime Trump is out in the wind and whatever it is he's got going on kind of starts going, that becomes a big thing on social media, what Hillary Clinton's wearing or how she changed her hair or whatever. And some of the sites that clearly don't like Clinton, they'll send out a still picture, digital picture of her making a certain expression or something, which, no matter how you freeze your face, you're going to look stupid. But I think a lot of that stuff's garbage, but that stuff is so easy. Just like you can just grab a couple words somebody says, splice it together, or just pull it out of context, and that's so much of that is happening right now. That most of cable they're not really getting into issues, a lot of those talk shows, and most of them are opinionated one way or the other, and they'll grab whatever it is they want, and it's I don't know what the analogy is, catnip, something. It's just like fuels, you just rile up people. But most of that doesn't do anybody any good. It's just so much easier. Like I was saying to her question, when you have so many candidates, it's just very difficult to do thoughtful pieces when you have, how do you do comparison pieces? So it's so much easier to show video of Bernie Sanders walking in here with his, hair all windblown, looks like a nutty professor kind of guy, or whatever people say about him, you know what I mean? It's just so much easier to poke fun at people, or, Rick Perry had this moment, remember when he couldn't remember 3 things, his famous oops moment? That caught on. Ted Cruz had a moment where he didn't remember the 5 things he wanted to change, and he sort of got a pass. Now it wasn't nearly as awkward watching it, but those are the things people people remember. Rick Perry got the reputation of being an idiot because he couldn't remember 3 things, which most people have forgotten something in their life. So I think we talked about this in the book too. I think that surely helped do Rick Perry in 2012. But had he worked this state like Rick Santorum did, I think if Santorum would have had that brain fart on live TV, I think people would have forgiven him a little bit. At least Iowans would have, because they thought, I know what he means. I've heard that before. Whereas Rick Perry, you never met before because he didn't spend hardly any time here, and he thought, man, that guy's not bright. And that was the storyline coming out of there, is he's not very smart. Well, it's pretty tough to be a governor and not be smart. I mean, you can argue you don't like somebody's policies or whatever, but it's pretty tough to be dumb, and get elected to one of these positions, No matter if you think every single proposal they have, an idea they have is wrong. Not many dumb people can get into office like that, I don't think.
Thanks.
I'm supposed to wait for the microphone, so everybody.
Me too.
Okay.
I'm curious. You talked about the national media a little bit. I'm curious what your take on the impact that the 24-hour news networks have had on just political discourse, and and you talked about kind of the easy stuff, and it's hard to fill 24 hours of news, and a lot of it's filled with what we assume is news, but really it's pundits kind of arguing. And from your perspective, have you seen a change in how politics are talked about, and how the general population kind of responds to it, and how have you had to adjust your own coverage in that respect?
Yeah, I think just going from one cycle to the next, it always seems so different. I mean, this one is clearly much more dominated by social media, and the campaigns embrace it. Clinton's campaign, and I mean, they really do have they've thought of almost everything, it seems like, except for maybe answers to that email mess. That was the one thing I never understood. I never understood how they didn't have that figured out. But they're always tweeting out pictures like quilters for Hillary and kayakers for Hillary, But they're trying to find a way to get into your inner circle, so that so many people are on Facebook that if they can win that one person over, and then you spread it among your inner circle, and then that spreads. So I feel like social media are just so much more a part of this, both good and bad. I like that people can use social media to talk to their friends about, hey, what do you think about Bernie Sanders wants free college tuition? What do you think about that? How's that going to work? Whatever. And I'm on Twitter a lot more than Facebook. My wife is on Facebook all the time. She should work for them. But I mean, that's where so many people are getting their news, and I think the good campaigns are finding a way to use that to their advantage. But I also think that that's where a lot of this misinformation gets spread. I remember my dad passed away last year, so I don't get to talk to him about this cycle, which stinks, frankly. But I remember back this last cycle, we were going to move because we had a son. We needed a bigger house. And my dad was retired, and he'd go every morning to this coffee shop where he'd sit around with his old farts, and they'd solve the world's problems, And my dad wasn't online a lot, but one of his buddies was, and saw some ridiculous story about how Barack Obama was giving everybody $50,000 to buy a new house. And so he called me and said, hey, why don't you do that? That'll help you out. I'm like, Dad, there's no way that's true. Like, how many people do we have? Like 300 million or whatever the country has. I go, can you imagine how much that would cost? Well, Wally told me. I'm like, all right, well, where did Wally hear it? Well, he saw it on the internet. And, these are clearly guys with too much time on their hands. And I told him, like, Dad, there is no way that's true. And I'd like to think my dad wasn't a dumb guy, but it was passed around between one guy's email who sent to another, and no matter how many times I told my dad it wasn't true, he wanted me to call the bank to find out where I can get $50,000 for this new house. I'm like, Dad, you and Mom live in an $85,000 house. You should sell your house, and you can live in a lot nicer house. Oh, we're not going to move. So you want to know part of it. But anyway, I just think, so that's like the good and the bad of social media. The good stuff is that I feel like it gives us a whole new way to communicate, And I still think that there's probably a way, maybe nobody's doing it this cycle, but that might be a way we see a third party or a no party, whatever you kind of call somebody like that, who can almost run against the big money and the big parties by using almost a social media campaign to connect with people, because you can almost do it for free. But so that part I think is good, and we can converse and share ideas and all that kind of stuff. And I use it in my reporting because it's an easy way to connect with people. Obviously, the bad stuff is out there too, and I think that's changed so much, and that's what we struggle with because we have this big monitor up in the back of my newsroom, and it shows the stories people are clicking on our website, and there are certain types of stories that people are going to click on. And a lot of my stories, if you try to do, you go home at night thinking, damn, I did a good job today. I got Jeb Bush on this, he talked about this, I got Rubio on this, I got Clinton on this, whatever. You do like a good comparison piece or whatever, and I see where the clicks are on that story, and then I see Bobby Jindal calls Trump an idiot, and that's the top one. That's our top political story on the site or something like that. It's hard to compete with that. So of course you feel some pressure for that, but that's just all this like clickbait, eye candy stuff that if you're sitting around at your pod at work, in your cubicle and you're bored and it's 3:00 and you don't want to write that report, you're like, I'm going to click on this and see what this is. Oh, hey, a dog with 6 legs. I'm going to click on this one, And it's hard to, compete with that. But fortunately, in my place, my bosses have stayed pretty committed to letting us go out there, and I never get any pressure from them to do that. You never know when your company gets sold and somebody else has a different philosophy, but we don't have that yet, and I hope we never do. That was a deep question.
This may be a chance for a book plug. I don't know, but the
book? What?
Yeah, exactly. The last couple cycles, while as you said, surprisingly in a way, the Democratic caucuses have tended to pick the eventual national winner. We've had a number of cycles now where the Republican caucuses have just been way off from the final results, and then you feed into that the chaos, the difficulties with some of the caucuses, the last cycle here. Do you think, is there a legitimate case to be made that is still being made that Iowa is not the best place to start off the whole process? Because every 4 years we hear that from other states that want it. Are we in danger of losing that?
I think we're probably always in danger of losing it because you're always going to have forces that don't like it. There's in that batch of emails that Hillary Clinton released, or finally got released yesterday, I should have brought that quote with me. It's something, she was in 2012 in an email, she was kind of dogging on the caucuses again, and she said that it's creatures of the extremities of the parties or something, the extremes of the parties, however she phrased it. And, nobody really thought she was a big fan of the caucuses in '08 to begin with. So she isn't probably going to be the biggest supporter of a caucus system, especially hearing and reading quotes like that. And she has pointed out some things that the Democrats have looked at about, when you restrict people to show up on a certain night at 7:00 and you have to physically be there in person, then obviously it eliminates anybody who's on, maybe a second shift person or a third shift person who's asleep, or you got taking care of a relative or little kids at home or whatever it is. So she brought up some points that are probably a pretty valid criticism of the caucus, And I think the Democrats are looking at ways to try to be a little more inclusive if they can figure that out. I know what you're saying about the mixed bag of results, because obviously if you step back and look, Iowa does have a mixed bag. Even Reagan, who all the Republicans like to trumpet, he didn't win. George H.W. Bush beat him in '80. I will say in Iowa's defense, though, Iowa caucuses have picked the last two back-to-back two-term presidents. So elected Obama twice, elected George W. Bush twice. That's about as good as you can get. I think the Republicans will probably feel a little pressure this time because they picked Huckabee, who then flamed out after Iowa. Santorum lasted longer, but didn't get the nomination. So it would probably help if Republicans pick the right one. That would probably help the cause. And you can make an argument that Sanders has a chance to upset Clinton here, and he could also do the same thing in New Hampshire. So if that happens and then Clinton wins kind of in a slugfest later on, then how much is she going to want to protect Iowa as well? Now, having said that, Clinton's very much playing to win, and I think she still looks like the favorite. But I think this conversation will come up. And if you remember last cycle, it was a disaster. And for a while, it looked like the caucuses were going to be before Thanksgiving, which would have been absurd. They were early enough because people were always complaining they had to be here over Christmas and couldn't be with their families. And they're out here either working on the campaigns or covering them or whatever. And we had it January 3rd or whatever the caucus night was. At least now we're in February, so you get a little holiday breather in there so you can hopefully be normal. But I think these things will come. I think it'll be another fight. This time it seems very safe, because they built in punishments for anybody who jumps before us. So hopefully it shouldn't be a factor, but you wonder, depending on how this one goes, if they pick the wrong candidates that don't end up getting the nomination, then that'd be a strike against them. And it's a lot of money and a lot of attention, so everybody else wants it. I still think, though, electing Obama was very helpful to Iowa's cause. Not to overplay this, but that was that storyline for so long that the national media did, that there's no way everybody in Iowa was white. You can't elect a black guy, except it happened. And so this state launched history. So, and you could very well do it again with Hillary Clinton too. So that would seem to help that argument.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
Since I have the mic, I guess I can, right?
If they don't wrestle it away from you.
Two things. You mentioned Trump's support hadn't eroded yet, but I heard something on a news story a few months ago, and there were some polls that came out, and he was still leading, but and I can't remember how they worded it, but the people who weren't supporting him felt more hostile, if that's the right word, towards him than other Republican candidates. So
he and Jeb Bush are the kind of two most disliked ones, I think, in the Iowa polls.
Okay, so as that field narrows then, and people have to start picking an alternate candidate, it would seem like he may stay at 25, 24%, but since when we get down to three candidates, somebody else might have 50 and 25, and so he may never lose his support, but it seems to me that his chances of winning the nomination because of that are slim. And I guess I'd like your feelings on that. The second question is that you mentioned the pressure that sometimes media feels because of the social media, and people aren't attracted to real stories or the flamboyant ones. But how much does that affect the politicians? Because it seems like we're more polarized as a country than we ever have been. And if you're trying to be a moderate Democrat or a moderate Republican, and you're trying to reach across the aisle so you can actually get something done, you lose your party support. And therefore you end up not being able to accomplish anything. So how do we break that gridlock and be willing to work with each other for not drawing a dark line in the sand and saying it's my way or the highway, and what can we actually accomplish? And how much of that is social media playing into?
Let's do the Trump one first. That's what I think is a big challenge for Trump. He's not really going up much anymore. He's just kind of holding there. He's lost a few points here and there, but he's not a lot of people's second choice. So as the field narrows, if his support would erode a little bit, I don't know where the new support's going to come for him. Now, I remember talking to one of his top guys probably 4 or 5 months ago. It was early in the summer. And he was very open about what they were going to do here. They were running a totally different kind of campaign. Republicans like to do this Pizza Ranch tour. They bounce all over the place. Trump wasn't going to do anything like that. But he also wasn't going to be a Romney, where it seemed like Romney was kind of uncomfortable with being a rich guy. It was awkward talking to him about it, whatever. Trump is clearly not uncomfortable with his wealth. So they were going to play it up. They were going to say, look, this guy is a known force. People like him the way it is. So he's going to come into town and he's going to fly in. If your town's big enough, he's going to come in his plane. If you're a smaller town, he's going to come in the helicopter or his smaller plane. But it's going to be a spectacle, and that's who he is. And they embrace that kind of thing. Now, they've attracted people who don't normally caucus, because most people don't caucus, right? You know, what do we have, like a fourth or about a fifth of the registered voters will show up to caucus, or whatever the percentages is, pretty low. So they're really banking on the fact that they're going to grow the pie. They're not going to get the slice of the people who normally show up all the time. They think they can do this, which Obama was able to do that, right? Obviously a far different candidate, but he was able to get a lot of people who didn't normally show up, and they showed up for him. So to me, that's Trump's big challenge, is how do you keep those people engaged, and how do you get them to go to a caucus, which is a weird thing. Because it's just not anything, if you've never caucused before, it's nothing like you've ever done before. It's just weird. It's just so different. You know, so you got to walk in here, probably take 2 hours of your time, and are people going to be willing to do that? So I think they have an educational process that they got to get people through to say, look, if you're really so ticked off at the system, we need 2 hours out of you. We don't need any money because he's rich. I need you to show up at this place, this time, do this, and then go live your life. But I think the polls show that he has kind of a weak underbelly there, and that maybe he's at his ceiling. So depending on how those other dominoes fall there, that's what he's got to work out. Refresh me on the second one.
The social media pressure and the gridlock.
Yeah. Oh, the gridlock. Well, I wonder, that's why I feel like every election is different, but this one, it seems like, are the anti-establishment outside people, are they going to be the story here? So is this going to be just one of those elections that everybody was completely wrong about? And the longer we go into this, the more it seems like maybe it is, because we have too many of them lasting. How can Trump and Carson still be as popular as they are? One of them should have collapsed. Both of them should have collapsed by now if we're doing a traditional cycle. I mean, maybe you have one that's not a normal politician, but whoever wins, nobody ever wins. You have to be elected to something normally, right? And I'm sure social media, you know, can ignite people in different ways. And I think it does make probably a more toxic partisan atmosphere. And if, you know, you can surround your entire life with people who think exactly like you, if you want to, or really close to you. Your Facebook groups, your book club, you watch MSNBC all the time, you watch Fox all the time, whatever your thing is. Listen to talk radio. You know, I just think we have a lot of people who don't probably hear the other side. And so I know moderates on both sides who are worried about that, because is this going to be an election where it's all about, I'm not working with them, and you're proud to say, I will never compromise on what I believe in, which is an interesting, for anybody here who's married, that's an interesting game plan to have. And since my father is a divorce lawyer, I try to pay attention to things about those trends, but I can't imagine, I think most people in their life have to compromise at some point, unless this is going to be the election where you can stand up and say, Congress is such a train wreck that we're not compromising on anything. And if we have to shut the government down, we're going to shut it down. We're going to burn it down. We're going to whatever. You know, that's kind of Ted Cruz. And he's got a strong following, and he has a good chance to win. Iowa, at least. So I don't know. This will be a great conversation on February 2nd, you know, when we see what the results are. I just think it's so hard to predict. It just keeps lasting.
So, you know, looking at the
You're going to
past
have to
year-
pay double since this is your second question.
All right, I can do that. You know, there's a lot of younger voters now. So how do you think that, you know, in the coming years that, I'm not saying, you know, this year hasn't, but do you think that going into the future, how are, you know, presidential candidates, you think, going to appeal to the younger crowd? And do you think that, you know, in the coming future there will be more younger people wanting to go and caucus? I mean, what do you see happening with the younger generations now?
I think you definitely see this cycle, they're definitely trying in different ways. Hillary Clinton wasn't on Snapchat in 2008, you know, Instagram, everything else. They're on almost every conceivable medium, hoping that that's this connection to get the more tech-savvy, younger millennial crowd. I mean, in theory, hopefully that's a good thing, that there are ways to connect with people who feel left out. And you know, everybody always likes to make fun of younger people for not turning out, but at that point in your life, there's just a lot of stuff you haven't done yet. You haven't bought a house yet. You haven't started paying back your loans. You're not really paying taxes yet. You don't have a family yet. You haven't really moved around much. I mean, there's so much you just haven't experienced that makes you think differently about, oh, taxes affect me this way, government services affect me this way, or whatever it is. I hope that social media, from what the campaigns are doing, will allow them to connect with people in different ways so you don't feel so left out. And it does open up even more opportunities to interact with the campaigns and sort of force them to take positions on stuff. And when a candidate comes in and stands in front of a microphone, hopefully people will ask questions. And that's where you can really put them on the spot about stuff. And most of the good questions come from the audience. They don't come from the reporters, because I feel like they're ready for us, and we get such a limited time, whereas they come in a room like this, be the first guy to raise your hand and hammer them on something and ask them something they've never had to answer before. I mean, that's to me what I think is so cool about this state. And I grew up in St. Louis, so we didn't have anything like this. That's what's kept us here in this state, is this experience you get to have. And even if you don't want to talk to them, to be able to come here and see them in person, I mean, it is kind of a cool factor to say that you've seen, if you've lived here long enough, you've seen the last 2 presidents. You don't even have to be that old. But you have a chance to talk to them. And I mean, imagine you're the guy who brought up, like Hillary Clinton says when she was in New Hampshire, if this is a true story, she said a woman brought up about pain pill addiction, which is something she said she'd never really heard much about before. And that sort of led her, and now she's kind of made that a part of her campaign, and also lowering prescription drug prices, which is sort of different. But I mean, you might be that person to affect huge change, that's something they've never thought about, which is kind of cool. Most people don't have that chance. So now you have to caucus. It's all on you. The future of the world depends on it.
Okay. On the news tonight, they were reporting that the United States is going to send more troops over to Syria to be on the ground fighting. And right away you think, slippery slope, here we come again.
That's because you remember Vietnam, probably.
In the race where Obama beat Hillary the first time, he came out against the war.
Right.
She was favorable to it. Do you see a scenario where it could be, Bernie has been against putting troops on the ground. Hillary still isn't so clear on it. Do you see impact on the upcoming election from this issue?
I definitely think that any particular issue can totally change the race. Like I thought the email thing could be a huge wound to Clinton. And that kind of dragged out for months. I know I joked about it before, but I never really understood what they were doing, because I never understood, surely they knew this was coming, and surely they already know what's in those emails, and yet she kept having different answers. Instead of just from the get-go saying, it wasn't that good of an idea. The whole idea about that she didn't want to have different devices or whatever the excuse was, that just doesn't make any sense. And so I think that's what reporters kept thinking, what the heck are they trying to say? Nothing makes sense. And nobody's found anything. I mean, it's hard to fathom that she did anything illegal. I mean, she's brilliant. Her husband's brilliant. They have access to tons of brilliant people. They just probably came up with a system that nobody's done like this before, But I thought that was a point where Sanders could really kind of swoop in there. The war is another point of separation between the two, since she's got the Iraq vote that from years back that Sanders doesn't have. But, in that last debate, I mean, he didn't, it was the one over at Drake. Remember, they changed the whole beginning of the debate, and it was going to be about because of the Paris attacks. That seemed to me like that would be an opportunity for him to really sell his vision on what our foreign policy should be. And instead, in his opening remarks, he kind of said, yeah, this is going on, and then he kind of weaved into income inequality, which obviously is the basis of a lot of his support. But to me, he has to offer some kind of alternative. So if you think Clinton is too much like a Republican or something, too much foreign intervention kind of thing. Whereas if Sanders is more of a, we got to let some of that play out, or let's go through the United Nations or whatever he wants to espouse here. Frankly, it's more Rand Paul who's probably the anti-war guy right now. I thought Sanders would make more of this, and this is an opportunity where he can kind of push Clinton, pointing to votes of the past and positions of the past, and maybe there's a weakness there with the Democratic base. But as of yet, it doesn't seem like he's really doing that, which I'm not really sure I understand why. At some point, he has to find he's got to find a path here, because unless we're going to find that he already missed his moment, and he had that chance and she's too strong and can't be beaten. But to me, foreign policy would be one where he can really show some daylight. But he didn't call and ask. What else you got?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Mr. Dave.
Uh-oh.
So you work with a considerable amount of traditional journalists, and you've started to see some folks like me, some non-traditional journalists show up.
That's why I'm nervous.
How would you say folks such as me, non-traditional journalists, have changed the game for you?
Ruined it all. Ruined it. I mean, competition's good, right? But it's hard. You're not like this, but I'll tell you, covering politics, a huge challenge for me is that campaigns will give stuff, give information, and give access to friendly media. Now you have more bloggers and more alternative sources, which I think for the greater good it's good to have more voices. But I mean, sometimes it stinks because they know that, we want to vet our stuff. Before I put it on the news, we need to check it out. And I'm not saying the friendly bloggers don't do that, but sometimes you can tell where the bloggers are politically. Maybe they have a favorite candidate. It's pretty tough to compete with that. But I think what you do is far different than that. But I think it's good because, like, I'll keep pointing to you, but what you're doing is hyper local, which is great. We try to be at my place, not to give out all of our company secrets, but we're up primarily against KCCI TV-wise, right? They've been number one forever. We've had our moments where we've kind of jumped in there and overthrown them a little bit. We have certain demographics that we do better with them. We do better with people who did not grow up in Iowa, who didn't grow up watching Channel 8. For some reason, we do better with them. We do better with younger people. We have certain strengths, and then they do a lot better, like with people 60 plus. They kill us on that. So we find, competitively, you got to do stuff differently, right? So we try to be super local best we can. So we do a lot of Iowa stuff, but I can't cover this community as thoroughly as like you could. So that's what I think the emergence of most of the alternatives. Some of them I don't think are very good for the greater good of mankind, but most of them I think are good. So, when you can do a really local focus like that, I think that's a big contribution to society.
You just have an input around to bounce things off of as competition?
We didn't really bounce stuff off each other like that because we couldn't. So my wife used to work at Channel 8 for quite a while. No, we had to keep everything secret. In fact, one time I remember when Obama was running, we really didn't check in on stuff with each other. And I thought I had this one-on-one with Obama, and it was going to be about his universal health care plan. And I had to wait outside this room, and I knew he was doing an interview with somebody, and I opened the door, and there she was. She had just finished her interview with him. And I remember I was so ticked off. And he made a joke about it, which I didn't even laugh at, because I'm like, damn it, I thought I had this one-on-one. And she had just had it with him, so we actually, I can share way more stuff with her now than I could before, so it's actually a lot better. Plus, she'll critique my stuff, let me know when I screwed up. And she'll ask, why'd you do this? Why didn't you do this? And before we weren't comfortable doing that, so I'm glad she's out of there. I chased her out. She couldn't handle it. Hope she's not watching this. All right, how about one more? Got a good workout tonight, didn't you?
I guess I have to join the double club.
All right.
You talk about those non-traditional journalists in the media. And,
Are you reading this question? Now I'm really nervous.
well, no, I just
you're looking at your
typing
phone,
it up
okay.
right now.
All right.
While that question was going on,
Uh-huh.
thought it up.
Gotcha.
Seems like media's favorite story. I'm sure everyone can accept that. Trump has been media's favorite story, using kind of the opposite psychology of someone as like Senator Obama in 2008 to catch momentum, in which Trump uses a lot of like anger for people like against other groups like politicians or foreigners, while Obama emphasized words like hope and change, in order to become, the first black president. And it shows when Trump's supporters are being, caught on video, literally beating up a protester or terrorizing Muslims going to a mosque in, I think it was Texas it was. So the question is, why is the psychology of Trump's influences not really being talked about recently through the media? Is it the fact that, where you have bias, do you think, that it doesn't want to be stressed that much? Because, it's having a big impact on a lot of people that aren't, say, the common, rural or urban voter, or someone, say, of a minority descent, like immigrants, like, say, a third of populations in southern states, they're really, having a big impression on this.
So
Yet they're not really being
think there's
talked
been
about.
enough focus on the way he talks and what he says?
Well, really, the effects of it and what's been going on, like people caught on tape beating up protesters, when if it's addressed, I'm seeing headlines
I
like
think that got
scuffles,
coverage. That happened one time, but it got coverage.
Yeah. Oh no, it seems to keep happening. I keep seeing different videos of it.
I haven't seen. That could be. I've seen that one time.
And maybe it's a problem.
But at some point, though, are you gonna hold? Are you gonna now? If you believe Trump is personally responsible for the way they basically had a heckler or protester, whatever you call it, and the people around him turned on him, and then they, I think, knocked a guy to the ground. So is Trump responsible for that?
Well, mainly, the effect of his kind of psychology and inflicting a lot of anger into, minorities or foreigners coming in or refugees, inflicting fear, kind of weaponizing that anger. It's becoming a lot more persistent, more than what people would think in the year 2015, and it's popping up.
I think that'll be something that'll be studied to see the way he talks. Is that inciting somebody to do something? If you looked at the way the coverage was of that shooting in Colorado, where I think we still don't really know what that man's intentions were, but if he said something about body parts from those Planned Parenthood undercover videos, I think that's incited the left about, okay, look, we've had all this language. This is this is how it's resulted. I'm not going to say that Trump he's definitely tapped into some anger. I think, stepping back at it though, we go through these different times where we want a different kind. So Obama did the hope and change, where people were frustrated with the way George Bush, at least enough people were frustrated with the way things had gone, and they went for let's all unite and do stuff. Obviously, that's never happened. The country is probably more split than it was before. So we heard the way Obama campaigned, and that just didn't happen. Now you can point to all kinds of different reasons depending on where your political bent is. This time around, if this is going to be, it could be another change. It's just that Trump doesn't talk the same way. I'm not saying Trump's going to win. I don't know if he will or not. I think the odds are against him actually becoming president if he doesn't, for the things we talked about before. I don't know where he can be people's first choice. If he's not their second or third choice, that makes it challenging. But he may find a way to do it, and the way he talks, the things he talks about may rile up people who don't normally vote, and there are tons of people who don't normally vote. and that may change everything. I know what you're saying, but I think it's also an easy way to, I don't know if you can always blame a candidate for what happens in the crowds. There have been, I can give you a bunch of examples of Clinton, the way they've dealt with the reporters over the years, that I don't hold personally against Secretary Clinton, but they've done crappy things. I mean, the way they treat us and stuff, but you can't, that doesn't really matter. You know, I don't think there's a lot, I don't need to talk about that because that's not important. Now, if we see a pattern of where he's whooping people up and they're physically assaulting protesters, then, you know, clearly that'll become a storyline. Maybe I'm just not familiar with all the things you're saying. I only know of that happening one time. And I feel like he was smarter about it at the next time. Because I think he said maybe that guy had it coming or deserved it or whatever he said. And he got beat up for verbally beat up. Trump took criticism for that. And at the next one, when they had some kind of protest, I think he handled it differently. But I know where you're going with it. I'm not sure it's reached that point. But if it does, then that's obviously a serious deal. What was the other hand? Did you have one, purple shirt man? Okay, sorry. You were just bidding on the next item? Yeah. Okay, very good. All right, go ahead. Uh-oh, I'm scared of this guy.
No, don't be scared of me.
All right.
What was your personal reaction, if you're willing to share that, at the debate where the Republican candidates assailed the moderators for what they consider to be gotcha questions, trivial questions, sure, off-topic stuff? Mm-hmm. What was your take on that, if you would comment on that, please?
Well, since there aren't any cameras here or a microphone, I probably wasn't the biggest fan of the moderators in that debate. Sometimes I get a little sensitive with gotcha. I think people have different meanings, personal interpretations of what gotcha questions are. If you last week said the sky's blue and today you're saying the sky's red or whatever, if I call you out on that, that's not a gotcha question in my mind. I think that's our position, is to hold you accountable for, hopefully that's the way we can tell if some guy just bribed you in the back alley, just gave you 10 grand to change your position or whatever, you know what I mean? So I guess I think it depends what you view of gotcha. But having said that, a couple of those early debates, the one was so focused on Trump. Every question was Trump. And I don't know that doesn't do people any good. I don't like the format of the debates anyway. There surely can be a better way to do it. I get it that it's great to have viewership and the ratings are crazy high. But the field, I'm talking about on the Republican side, it's so big that wouldn't we be better served if, no matter how you feel it should be divided, and I get it that you're always going to want big names there, but if you just put it like the March Madness, some tournament, figure out seedings or something, or you put them all in a hat and you pick it out and you say, okay, from 6 to 7, these 5 candidates are going, from 7 to 8, these 5, and then from wherever we are, 8 to 9, whatever that worked out to be. It just seems like we'll get a lot more out of it. Frankly, I thought some of the undercard debates were interesting because they got more into the issues, I think that's what we're supposed to be doing, as opposed to, hey, don't you think Trump's an idiot, and don't you think this? And some of those, that's where I thought Cruz was brilliant right there. What I thought was especially impressive with Cruz, and he's obviously a very smart guy, is where he, in his rift there, where he came after the moderators, he said, you said this about Trump, you asked this, he ticked off 4 things, and maybe he was plotting that in his head, but that seemed like that was just bam, bam, bam. And then the rest of them, they're like, oh yeah, media suck, yeah, that's right, I want to say that too. But he was the one who really jumped out there, and they probably got what they deserved. And if that criticism would have been off base, I think we would have seen no change, and instead we saw changes, right? The rest of it, since then, it seems like they're a little more what we expect in a debate. I mean, they're still going to, they still put the front runner in the middle so that they can try to get people to gang up from different sides and stuff. But it felt a lot less Trump. And the same with I think it was CNN. You could tell the storyline beforehand was going to be Trump versus Fiorina because of what he said about her face. And from the get-go, it seemed like it was set up that it was going to be this Trump-Fiorina clash, and sure enough, that's what the storylines were. And then, she kind of had her moment, and then she hasn't come back up since then. But so I don't know. I was probably on some of their sides, frankly, in that debate. There has to be some kind of decorum with it. I mean, we are electing the president of the United States, so there should be a little bit of, you don't have to kiss their butt, but there should be a little bit of respect. And I just hate every question about a certain candidate. And I'm not picking on Trump or whatever, but every question can't be about Donald Trump. There are plenty of other people running, and everybody needs to be vetted. But I don't think personally as a reporter, I don't think it's a problem to say, Marco Rubio said this. What do you think about that? I don't think that's bad, because I think that's how we can see differences between them. I think there are respectful ways you can do that. But that wasn't as bad as I feared from you. Thank you all very much. I'll do my final book plug. I'll hang out over here if anybody wants to pick one up. You can buy these online. Amazon has them. I think they're like $14.99, then you can pay handling and all that stuff if you're looking for Christmas gifts. But I always have a college discount of $10 if you do it in person. So I'll do those over there, and I can sign them if you have anybody you want to get it for a gift or anything. But thanks. I always appreciate these conversations. So thank you, and thank you, Tammy, for setting this up. So thanks.